Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. IRS letters explain why some 2020 recovery rebate credits are different than expected. IR 2021-76, April 5th, 2021, Washington. As people across the country file their 2020 tax returns, some are claiming the 2020 Recovery Rebate Credit, the RRC. The IRS is mailing letters to some taxpayers who claim the 2020 credit and may be getting a different amount than they expected. So let's just recap the Recovery Rebate Credit. We're on EIP, Economic Impact Payments 3 at this point in time, but you got to kind of keep separate in your mind EIP 3 from EIP 1 and 2. Economic Impact Payments 1 and 2, in other words, you can think of them as prepayments of the Recovery Rebate Credit that is on the 2020 tax return. So if everything went properly and you got the right amount of the payment, then you don't really need to do anything on 2020 because you've gotten the proper payment on it. However, if there were problems with the payment, you didn't get the full amount for whatever reason, the Recovery Rebate Credit is the remedy for that. So filing the 2020 tax return, claiming whatever you think you should be getting according to the 2020 information, and taking the difference between what was actually received in round 1 and round 2 for the actual payments is the Recovery Rebate Credit. That's different than the third economic impact payment, which may be influenced by the 2020 tax return or the 2019 tax return in a similar way as the the economic impact payments 1 and 2 could have been influenced by 2019 or 2018 tax returns, in that they might be using those tax returns as an estimate to give the payment, and you would think then the payment could be tied to the 2021 for EIP 3 in a similar way as EIP 1 and EIP 2, Economic Impact Payment 1 and 2, are basically tied to the 2020 tax return. Therefore, you still want to file the tax return for if you need to give information to the IRS related to the Economic Impact Payment 3, but there's nothing actually on the tax return you can do other than file the tax return and tell the IRS about yourself and or dependents related to the Economic Impact Payment 3, so they can take that information and give you the proper information. For EIP 1 and 2, then those are the ones that if there was a problem, those have already been out there tied to the 2020 tax return. That's where the Recovery Rebate Credit comes in. So now we're talking about the Recovery Rebate Credit. We're talking then about Economic Impacts Payments 1 and 2, not EIP 3, and the remedy for that, the Recovery Rebate Credit, and why the IRS may issue something different to what people have claimed with the Recovery Rebate Credit on their tax return for 2020. All right, here we go. It's important to remember that the first and second Economic Impact Payments, EIP, were advance payments of the 2020 credit. Most eligible people already received the first and second payments and shouldn't or don't need to include this information on their 2020 tax return. So for most people, it's not an issue because they sent out the proper payment, and you don't have to deal with anything on your tax return because you got the proper payment. Everything should push forward properly. However, if you didn't get the proper payment for whatever reason, there's various reasons why that could happen, then that's when this comes into play, filing the Recovery Rebate Credits for Economic Impact Payments 1 and 2. People who don't receive a first or second EIP or received less than the full amounts may be eligible for the 2020 RRC, the Recovery Rebate Credit, the RRC. They must file a 2020 tax return to claim the credit, even if they don't usually file a tax return. When the IRS processes a 2020 tax return claiming the credit, the IRS determines the eligibility and amount of the taxpayer's credit based on the 2020 tax return information and the amounts of any EIP previously issued. In other words, the IRS has this information on their side as well. It's kind of like if you have a W-2 information, you know the employer has given you the W-2 so that you can put it on your taxes, but you also know they gave it to the IRS. If you put something on your taxes different than what's on that W-2 form, the IRS is going to send you a letter. They won't say, we're going to force you to basically say what we think is the proper number, but they pretty much say, you know, these are the changes. Do you agree with those changes? If not, you're going to have to basically argue with us about it because we have the W-2 over here. You have to justify why the information we have would then be wrong. With these economic impact payments, round 1 and 2, they were issued by the IRS. So obviously the IRS has the information of the economic impact payments going out. They're going to tie that then to what is reported on the tax return. And so they know the money that went out. You would think the thing that they may not know are some circumstances such as dependence or your income level, which could result the phase out of the payment. So given that information, they could make adjustments just like they would if you put something on the tax return that would be different than what's actually given on the 1099 or W-2s, which again the IRS has. So if a taxpayer is eligible, it will be reduced by the amount of any EIPs already issued to them. If there's a mistake with the credit amount on line 30 of the 1040 or 1040 SR, the IRS will calculate the correct amount, make the correction, and continue processing the return. Now, this is kind of a good thing because that basically means they're not going to stop, hopefully. It's not going to hold them up. They're still going to process the return, hopefully get the refund out if a refund is applicable, rather than basically stopping, putting it aside, looking at it later, or possibly stopping and sending a letter without the refund being in place. What they're going to do is what you've seen them do in other situations where they make this type of adjustment. They're going to say, hey, our records reflect something different than what you've reported. We believe this is what it should be. We're going to recalculate the tax based on our information. We're going to send you a letter asking if you approve of that change. If you don't, you can argue it. But most likely, it's probably right. Most likely in most cases, if you agree with it, then the change should be made basically automatically, and you just basically agree with it. So if a correction is needed, there may be a slight delay in processing the return, and the IRS will send the taxpayer a letter or notice explaining any change. So you should get a letter, of course, whenever the IRS changes something on your tax return. They need your approval for it, so they should change it. They give you a letter and see if you agree with the change that they have made or if you want to argue it. Taxpayers who receive a notice saying the IRS changed the amount of their 2020 credits should read the notice. So yeah, you should. They're recommending that, like, when they send you a letter, you should actually read it. So it's probably a good thing. If you get something from the IRS, probably want to check it out. So then they should review the 2020 tax return, the requirements, and the worksheet in the Form 1040 and Form 1040 SR instructions. Here are some common reasons the IRS corrected the credit. The individual was claimed as a dependent on another person's tax return. This is probably a big one in this year because note that this credit, the round 1 and round 2, was actually lower, or you had that 17 limitation that restricted some people if claimed on another person's return. If they were over 17, then there was no benefit given to either the taxpayer or the person claiming on it. And the first round, the amount that was given for dependents was lower than the amounts that were not for dependents. And therefore, you would think that would give people incentive. They would want to try to be claiming their own tax return if they're looking specifically at the economic impact payment. So because they would be more likely that they would get the full payment in that case. So for example, if you had, say, a student that was going to school, they were over 17, they're usually claiming as a dependent, but they're over 17, then they're not going to get any benefits from round 1 and round 2. Round 3, they kind of should because they kind of removed that rule. But then you can see why the student might have pressure then to say, well, maybe I should file my own taxes at this point in time because then I would be eligible possibly for the economic impact payment. And of course, if the student then filed their own tax return and the parents claimed the student as a dependent, now you have a situation where two people are claiming, the same person, and that's going to be a problem. The IRS is going to disallow that situation. I would think of that situation always happens because there is a benefit, for multiple people to claim the dependent or a person, but it's probably was heightened due to the economic impact payments and the effects that would have on people's behavior with regards to filing taxes. So that's one reason. You can't have a person claimed on 2 returns, and that would be a reason they would send a letter and an adjustment. The individual did not provide a social security number valid for employment. So if you don't have a social security number, that's one of the requirements to get the economic impact payment. The qualifying child was 17 or older on January 1st, 2020. So there's that big rule where you have the qualifying child, meaning it's not just a dependent for round 1 and round 2. They changed that for round 3. They have to be a dependent or a qualifying child, and one of the restrictions would be they have to be under 17, which means that a lot of dependents, those over 17, like students or disability people or people that are parents basically on the tax return, would not be getting a benefit either themselves or on the other tax return. So that could have caused people some confusion or altered people's behavior on their tax filing and whatnot and that kind of thing. So math errors relating to calculating adjusted gross income and any EIPs already received. So IRS.gov has a special section correcting recovery rebate issues after the 2020 tax return is filed. There's a link to that here. Provides additional information to explain what errors may have occurred. Taxpayers who disagree with the IRS calculation should review their letter as well as the questions and answers for what information they should have available when contacting the IRS. So like always, if they give you an adjustment and you say, hey, look, that's not right, I don't agree with that for whatever reason. For example, if they give you a social security number and say that number is invalid, and you're saying, well, it is valid, possibly it's valid, or you got the number wrong or something like that, then you're going to go back and argue back with the IRS. You just want to make sure that you have a good standing as to why, under the law, that you would be claiming the credit, and then continue with the correspondence and push forward from there. If they're right, if you look at it and they're correct with their recalculation, then you're going to have to accept, the easiest thing would be to accept the calculation if it was correct. So the Internal Revenue Service urges people who have not yet filed their 2020 tax return to properly determine their eligibility for the 2020 before they file their 2020 tax returns. To calculate any credit due, start with the amount of any EIPs received. Use the RRC, Recovery Rebate Credit, the RRC worksheet or tax preparation software. This is something that's really good with the tax preparation software. You should have access, if you're under a certain income level, to free software to use. The interview process, very helpful for things like the Recovery Rebate Credit and things like refundable credits, child tax credit possibly, and the earned income tax credit. Taxpayers who didn't save or didn't receive an IRS letter or notice can securely access their individual tax information with an IRS online account. There's a link to the IRS online account here. Anyone with income $72,000 or less can file their federal tax return electronically for free through the IRS Free File program. So that's going to give you a link to third-party software. These are, good software, top of the line, kind of individual tax preparation type software. And they have offers if your income is below a certain threshold, and you can review those offers with the free file here. As you do so, make sure that you're taking into consideration your state filing needs, because you want to make sure to do those both at the same time. A lot easier to do that way. Or make sure that whatever software you are using has the capacity, if you're filing for an earned income tax credit or other refundable credits, that the software has that capacity for in the free option as well. The fastest way to get a tax refund, which will include your 2020 RRC Recovery Rebate Credit, the RRC, is to file electronically. So you want to file electronically if possible, because that'll give you your refund faster typically, and have it direct deposited. So direct deposit meaning going right into your bank account, into their financial account. Bank accounts may prepay many bank accounts, many prepaid debit cards, and several mobile apps can be used for direct deposit when a routing and account number are provided. If using a prepaid debit card, check with the financial institution to ensure that card can be used and to obtain the routing number and account number, which may be different from the card number. For more information, you can see IRS information letters about economic impact payment and recovery rebate credit. There's a link to that here, or visit irs.gov/RRC. And the frequently asked questions, there's a link to that here. And then there's a bunch of other topic links. There's topic A, claiming the recovery rebate credit if you aren't required to file a tax return. Topic B, eligibility. Topic C, claiming the tax credit. Topic D, calculating the credit. Topic E, receiving the credit. Topic F, finding the first and second economic impact payment amounts to calculate the 2020 recovery rebate credit. And remember, when you're calculating the credit, obviously you need to know what payment you did receive. You can go to your account on the irs.gov website and look that up if you don't know what the amount is at this point. So topic G, correcting issues after the 2020 tax return is filed. So there's links to all those topics and all that good information here. There'll be a link to this in the description.